Welcome back to the channel. Sorry for the delay on getting this video put together, but this is the final installment of the Skullcrow build. Alright, I'm about to paint the armature, so I figured before I did, I would kind of do a little once over here so you can see how I put this together. Once everything's painted black, it's going to be a lot harder to see. So when the prop is static, the lower arms will actually be up like this, and that means this pneumatic cylinder right here will be charged. As the prop activates, this cylinder and that cylinder on both sides will extend out just like you've seen on the previous videos. You can see I've done some fairly decent cable and airline management. I have to button up all of these cables and run another one. These cables will be for the LED eyes, and then one will be to the trigger on the servos. So pretty straightforward, and then I'll come up here and show this part. So when the animation is done playing, the neck does come up here, and those springs really help pull a little bit of that tension off. And this is the Pico server controller that I will mount up here. And then there'll be another wire that goes up here for the actual switch, so that it is timed perfectly with the sound. Although it doesn't have to be that perfect because I'm not animating the mouth, so that makes things a little easier. This right here is just a stop to prevent this from going all the way back. It's mostly helpful when I needed to set up this linkage to get everything kind of dialed in. But you certainly don't want to put any undue stress on the servos either. The wind's coming this way. This is facing the street, and that's usually the direction that the wind comes from. So we don't want a big sail. We certainly don't want the neck to fail or the prop to topple over. So I figured this guy needed a hat, so I made him a hat out of EVA foam, and I made it so that it was removable from the prop, just for storage, and I was worried about the wind. Well, we did have a big windstorm. I forgot to remove the hat, and it acted like a big sail and ended up bending the neck of the prop pretty significantly, but it was okay. I was able to bend it back, surprisingly so, but if I had to do this over again, I would use a much bigger threaded rod in the neck, just because it just didn't seem strong enough to hold up to that wind. So I'm painting the ribcage and his hands with fluorescent blue paint. Whenever you paint something with fluorescent paint, you always want to make sure you prime it white. Not gray, not any other color. If you don't prime it white, it's never going to fluoresce as much as you want it to. Alright, try to get the best overhead shot that I could here so I can explain all this. So this is the final control panel. The supply air will come in through here. It'll go through this manifold, where there's a line that goes to the intake of each regulator, and then the out feed goes to each cylinder. I have my cylinders color coded, and the corresponding hoses on the prop are also color coded, so when I go to plug it in I just have to match the colors. That just makes setup really easy, and if I needed to bring this inside, if it started to rain or something, I could do that. So this is the main controller. It's a Boobox Flex, and this is the 8 channel. It's got 2 dimmable channels, number 7 and number 8 for dimmable LEDs. All of the relays are solid state. They supply their own 12 volts. You could do 24 volts as well, but the voltage just depends on what you're supplying from the adapter. So in my case, I'm using 12 volts. The solenoids are all 12 volts. All my LEDs are 12 volts, so I like 12 volts. I've also wired a DMX out cable, and that just gets wired right here in the DMX, and that's an add-on feature, but it's worth it because it gives you, I can't remember, like 128 channels to work with, so you could actually power and control a lot of DMX devices if you have them. It's worth the extra, like 40 bucks or whatever it was. And then there's 2 inputs here. So because of where my prop is, I don't know if I'm going to be able to have cars set it off. I'm going to experiment with some motion detectors. But I also wanted 2 versions of the prop. One where the head is just moving, and then another version, the big scare version, where all of the solenoids go off. And I wanted to do that manually for starters. It's a new prop. I don't know how it's going to behave. It does get windy up here sometimes. So what I've done is I've wired a wireless remote controller with 2 relays, and then the relays will be the triggering devices for now. What I'll do is I'll also wire a motion sensor. The motion sensor would trigger like the scene number 1, and then I would manually trigger scene number 2. If a couple of cars stopped and they were watching the prop, then I can fire all the solenoids. The other thing that I've done is, and I'll explain all of the outputs, but the other thing that I've done is I have another program on a Pico FX, which is the same thing as their Thunder and Lightning. That's what I use it for. Basically, it's got 2 plugs. You plug in incandescent light bulbs or halogen light bulbs. It will not work with LED. Each one is a separate channel though, and it comes with a preloaded Thunder and Lightning soundtrack, and the lights dim and flicker in sync with the Thunder sounds, which is really cool. So what I've done on the ambient scene on this will play the Thunder and Lightning regularly. This also has ambient audio, and I'll run both audios through a mixer. The ambient audio on this control board is just not swamp sounds like I used last year, but it's like just kind of eerie Halloween sounds, but nothing too crazy. There's no one screaming. The most effects on there, maybe some there's some crows crowing, and then there's like a train whistle or something like that in the background. Most of it's just like wind and stuff like that. I wanted something really subtle. When the prop goes off on the second prop, or I'm sorry, the second input, if I fire that, that's with all of the solenoids, everything goes off. But it also triggers this because I've kind of spliced in another pigtail to trigger this. This will go into the inputs here. And what happens on this is there's a scene 1 on here, and it will go to scene 1, but it will also mute, because in the Director software, you can actually control so many different things. I mean, you're only limited really by your imagination, but I will mute the audio out from this, because what I've done is I've programmed the Thunder and Lightning, or the Thunder light flickers, to be in sync with the soundtrack that's coming off of here. Because on the sound that I'm using, the scare sound, actually has Thunder and Lightning already, so I wanted to sync it up. So fingers crossed, we'll see how that works. But I wanted to show you all this before I button this up and plug everything in. So this is how the remote works. It's like a channel, even though there's 4 channels on here, this only has 2 relays. They do sell them with 4 relays. A channel would be my trigger input number 1, and then the B channel would be the trigger input number 2. Like, I'll test it, so I'll fire that, and then the prop starts. You can see that this is playing, and you can see that this is playing as well. And then I'll explain how what I have plugged into the numbers. Oh, the other thing, this has an expansion cable that goes into this relay pack. It's an 8-channel relay pack. This is killer because you can just plug in lights, and they basically mimic these inputs. So a lot of these inputs are going to be on during the entire scare, which makes it easy. So I could program some of these to be normally closed outputs or normally open outputs. And you do all of that in the Director software. So my channel number 1 is going to fire the main cylinder. That's what's going to activate the scissor mechanism. 2 is going to be the shoulders, and 3 is going to be the elbows. And I will time all of these so I make sure that the prop doesn't get kind of hung up on itself. 4 is a trigger switch for the servos. So there's the line that will power 4 goes directly into the servo brain, which is up near the head of the prop. And that's just a momentary switch. And what I did was, when I did the servo, because there's no talking, it was relatively easy to synchronize to the soundtrack. I just made the head move kind of randomly, and I think it'll be fine. And then 5 and 6 is really what I'm going to use for this. So I'm going to have one of these. Let's see. The channel 6 will be normally closed during the ambient sound, so the lights will be on. When the trigger fires or the prop goes off, 6 will go off, and then 5 will come on. So what I'll do is I'll have like just different colored lights. Some lights will come off, some lights will go on. I have some really nice outdoor lights that they're not DMX. A lot of the DMX lighting, that's really expensive. They're not really rated for outdoor use. They do make some that are. I just don't have those. But this makes it kind of nice to have this expansion pack. And then I have 2 channels at the end for that are dimmable for LEDs, and I'm just going to use one of those channels for the eyes. I'm not going to do any like fading or flickering or anything. Basically I want to get this out and working just to see what it looks like. And if I want to reprogram something, all I have to do is pull the SD card out, pop it in the computer. I can change it on the fly. It'll reload to the card, and then I can put it back in. It makes it really easy. One thing that's interesting on this control board is all of your commons or your positives, they only have 1 terminal, but each one is fused. So like channel 1 and 2 has its own fuse, 3 and 4 has its own fuse, 5 and 6, so on, according to the manual anyway. So instead of putting, you can't share a positive between all of them. They're independent. So channel 1 and 2 has to share this positive. I don't like putting 2 wires into 1 terminal though, because inevitably what will happen is one of the wires will come out and it'll frustrate you trying to figure out what's wrong with your prop. So I really like these little terminal blocks. I'll put a link in the description down below. I have like 2 bays, 3 bays. You can see this one is a 5 bay for my positive and negative, because this controller is supplying 12 volts to my remote trigger. But you can power other things with it because it's got a 5 amp power supply. So that just makes it kind of easy. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put this cover on the remote switch, and then I'm going to take this out to the prop. I'm going to plug in all of the hoses. I'm going to plug in all of my accessories. I'm going to make my final wiring connections that's coming down from the prop for the trigger for the servo, and then also for the eyes, and then I'm just going to test it out.